Good to see you again. If you've joined us before, if not, my name is Andy Costello. I'm Head of Customer Solutions here at Kineo. Thank you for joining us on today's webinar. We are going to take a look at the 4 pillars needed to create a successful learning environment. It's something we've put together and been speaking about for a while. Now, to put some context around this, the learning environment is changing so much and at such a pace that it's hard for business to keep up with. The landscape is vast with so many systems and technology options, and the journey is long with a lot of stakeholder engagement. Every day we see businesses suffering from HR burnout, talent burnout, as they try to find their way through their own internal learning maze. As L&D professionals, all of us want to help organizations navigate this complex world of learning, from strategy to implementation and beyond. And so we've devised these 4 fundamental structures, if you like, that you can begin to put in place to help build the right foundation for your ever-evolving learning environment, or ecosystem, or suite, or architecture. Pick or choose your own word for it. I'm not going to talk at you anymore, and neither am I going to be doing this alone. Instead, and as usual, I brought in some experts in the field to help out, experts in learning experience and data and technology. And I'm delighted to say that I'm joined today by Lars Hyland, Managing Director of Totara, an expert in talent experience and a well-known figure in the HR and workplace learning community. Welcome, Lars. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Andy. Great to be here.
Good to see you. We're also joined by our resident learning expert, Preston Gales, who leads our learning design team at Kineo. He has over 20 years of industry experience. I hope that's about right, Preston, and is making a big impact in the design vision process and methodology learning space. Welcome, Preston. Good to see you again.
Hey, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
And also joining us is Stephen Foy, a solutions consultant at Kineo with over 15 years experience in helping clients find the right learning solutions to leverage better business results. Hello, Stephen.
Hi, Andy. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me.
Thanks all for joining us today. So before we get into it, just as a reminder for those watching, do add your questions into the Q&A tool. We reserved the last 10, 15 minutes or so at the end of the session for questions. We'd love you to join the conversation, so let us know your thoughts or any comments you have. And my colleague Janika will be keeping an eye on these so we can cover them at the end. We've also got the chat function open today as well, so feel free to add your comments as we go through, and just make sure you select panelists and attendees if you'd like everyone to see your comment. Great, so without further ado, let's get the conversation started, shall we? Now, hopefully you can see the diagram on the screen, which defines the 4 pillars that we're going to be talking about today. 4 pillars that we believe every learning professional should consider when defining and designing their own successful learning architecture or ecosystem, as I referenced earlier. Now, we'll work our way through the central wheel here. We'll start at the top right with business and learning objectives first. Then we'll be putting learners at the heart of skills and development. And of course, we'll then be moving to defining what modern learning experiences are, what they look like, and why that's crucial, finishing on data and how we can all reap the rewards of a robust set of learning analytics. So before we get into that, I wanted to put a poll out to everybody and just ask the question, if you could all reflect on this. What is the top learning challenges that you in your organization are facing right now? What is your top learning challenge that you're facing right now? Is it about technology? We have too many systems that don't integrate with each other. Is it data and analytics? People have been talking about this for a while now, but are they getting it right yet? So what are the right competencies to measure, and how do you bring that all together in a data set? Is it about learner engagement, something that has always been a challenge? Low engagement, completion rates, are people actually doing the learning or just clicking through, and how are you measuring their success? Is it about stakeholder buy-in? We don't have the internal expertise or support from our journey, throughout our journey, from the stakeholders and the sponsors that are asking us to do this stuff, or is it all of the above, or a combination? What do you think? So have a think through those and let us know your thoughts. Great, as I'm jumping around from screen to screen. Just while we're reflecting on this, Lars, I was going to ask you first, if I may. Welcome again. Some of those challenges I think are faced by a lot of people. What, in your view, and what are you hearing about at Totara, are the top learning challenges that organizations are facing when they're introducing their own kind of learning strategy?
Yeah, I think those challenges have become sharper really post-pandemic. When I say post, we're sort of still involved very much in a very highly volatile and uncertain sort of environment, and how do organizations respond to that effectively? And that plays right down into supporting people, and it plays into supporting people's transitions to fresh skills, building the resilience, more softer skills, if you like, to sort of cope with what can be quite stressful ways of working, whether that be remote, hybrid, or just changing direction every month. I mean, it can be as dramatic as that. So yeah, my thinking is that there's a lot on everyone's plate, and that the learning community has a big part to play in affecting that transition, that continual transition, if you like, for organizations to cope.
A lot on everyone's plate. That's spot on. Absolutely. I think we're all feeling that. So we've got some results up now. Fairly balanced, actually. All of the above, though, seems to be the common denominator here. Data and analytics, their engagement still a high, a popular choice there. Good. Well, look, we're going to try and cover all or some of these as we move forward today. I mentioned the wheel you see in front of you now, the 4 pillars going around that wheel. And I'm going to start with you, Preston, if I may. We've outlined the first step when building a sound learning strategy. We should be thinking about the business and learning objectives first. As learning professionals, and certainly in my background as a designer, it was all about learning objectives and then maybe learner outcomes. But now we're talking about bringing the business objectives into this as well. What's the thinking behind that?
So they have to be aligned. The learning strategy has to be aligned with the business strategy. And it sounds simple, right? But it's not. It's often missed. L&D is going one way, the business is going another way, and they're not talking. Or it's misaligned in scope, timing, or measurement. How are you going to measure it? Timing meaning you wanted to build skills in analytics, or something before analytics, and now it's too late. It took you too long to get everyone upskilled. So you have to get the timing right, the measurement right, and all of your learning outcomes need to align with the current and future needs of the business.
So business and learning aren't talking, and do you think that's getting better? Is it something that has always been a problem?
It is getting better. It's getting better as more data is coming up. It's getting easier to have those conversations, and L&D has to have a seat at the table with the business leaders and say, here's how, and they have to work together. Say, here's how we're going to get our resources, growing the business.
So a seat at that C-suite table, that strategic table where, I mean, you're right. We see this, don't we? The successful companies have learning at that top table and have learning strategy directing their business strategy as much as anything else. Great. Thank you. Anybody else? Feel free to come in whenever we're having this conversation. Stephen, I was just going to ask you, if I may, the core piece of the learning puzzle here is this business and learning objectives. Why is this a foundation in your view?
Sure. I mean, I think Preston's answered this to some degree already, really, but I think the two things need to be completely aligned, don't they? The business objectives and the learning objectives. When I started out in this industry, and I was very young, I thought, I kept coming into meetings where people were talking about the business objectives, and I used to think, why are we talking about business objectives? And of course, now I know the answer, which is that the learning will enable the meeting of those business objectives. So it's kind of no mystery now, but unless you have a target and a destination that you're heading for, you're not going to get there. So those business objectives are the thing that they're your map. If you're going on a journey, you need a map, and you need to know how to get there, and that's what the objectives are. And without them, you could create some very pretty learning or some lovely blended programs, but how are you going to know that they're going to take you where you need to get to, and how are they going to get the business to where that needs to get to? So that's why they're the missing jigsaw piece, or rather not the missing jigsaw piece, but the key jigsaw piece.
Yeah, and exactly how you can define what you're measuring against to establish that success.
Exactly.
Yeah. So getting business objectives together, first of all, to establish those, you need stakeholder buy-in. You need buy-in from your sponsors, from people right at the top. Lars, why is that an important factor, and how do we go about getting that engagement?
Yeah, well, I mean, to get engagement, you can't see learning in isolation anyway. I mean, it's got to be seen in the round of all the factors that affect, or effect with an E, performance and productivity and motivation for individuals when they're at work. So clarity around goals, so business goals, down to your team goals, being clear about what your manager's goals are, what then your individual goals are, and aligning the learning and support to achieve those goals is a big part of ensuring that that learning will have some impact. But coupled to the learning is the feedback mechanisms. So when we design a learning experience, it shouldn't just be the content. It should be how are people going to be putting it into practice. They can do it virtually, but they can also do it in controlled, structured, real environments, should we say, whatever that happens to be for the topic that's being covered. But there's feedback there and there's collaboration there, and so it becomes real, and that's how you embed the change. That's how change happens. So you need to be able to bring all of those elements together, I think, to really demonstrate, I think, to the top table, as you've said, that learning makes a difference, because it's not just about the learning, it's about how it joins in with the performance management and the engagement practices that the organization has.
Sorry, Lars, didn't mean to cut you off. Is it a little bit chicken and egg, though? It's about proving to the business at the top table that learning's working to get their engagement, but they're going to be engaged once they see that the learning is working, and the only way we can prove that learning is working is if we've met those business objectives that they should be we're wanting them to set in the first place.
Well, part of it is about language, though, I think, and the language that the learning professional community will use, because if we, as Stephen's point, if you're focused on what we all love, is what's the learning sort of treatments and how we want to sort of handle those things. If we overly focus on that and not actually use the language of business, which is, so we're going to be building a set of activities and an experience that is joined up. It includes the management community, it includes the leader, the stakeholders, it includes obviously the individual learners, and it's as personalized as it possibly can be. Then it's not seen as it can be too often. That learning is a sort of a necessary cost, as opposed to a supportive investment as part of the whole solution.
A strategic decision, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's what we need to do, and what we need to do to get right. But what are the kind of pitfalls, or other things that people need to look out for when they're setting their objectives? Stephen, Preston, who wants to have a go at this?
Oh, there are so many pitfalls. I mean, basically, if you don't do all of the things that Lars just suggested, then you're already going to be doing quite well on the pitfall ticking off box thing. I would say that just from personal experience, the ones that come up most often are people get too fixated on the form of the learning interaction or the experience, so that that disjoint between what you're creating and what it actually needs to achieve, that's a major pitfall. I'm not going to give you any solutions here about how to do that. I'm just going to list these pitfalls. I think not prioritizing. So obviously, if you've got some major incident that your organization has had to come back from, and there's been some huge negative press about it, and you need to deal with something, and let's be honest, these are at the heart of many of the learning programs that we design. You have to sort of look at what the metrics of that particular incident that you're trying to prevent happening again are, and then you need to look at all of the sort of individual granular human errors or process errors or system failings that led to that, and then you need to work out how you're going to chip away at them. So those, and there'll be some that are high priority and there'll be some that are low priority. So your objectives need to kind of go into that level of depth. So what are the quick wins? What are the things that we need to succeed at or prevent happening again as an absolute priority? Those are the things that you would do. If you don't think about that, and you take some kind of more nebulous or secondary error or area for improvement, and you base everything around that, then obviously you're going to be missing a few tricks. And I think people, they need to think about success. So you need to think about making those initial successes. Obviously, we live in a world where people need to prove that what they've done was worthwhile, was a good use of money, a good use of resource, and it prevented the thing that had to be prevented, or it kind of led to the performance improvement that everybody needed. So, but you're not going to get there and achieve everything in the first sort of iteration of whatever it is you're creating. So you need to kind of think, how are we going to get the first success who is that going to get to buy into this process so that we can do more of this? So I think focusing on those quick wins, focusing on what you can be successful at first before focusing on the things that you might need a bit more help or a bit more buy-in to be successful later on. Those are the things I think. Also, I mean, we talked a little bit about the focusing on the format, but I think, you know, so many of the learning projects that I've worked on with colleagues and clients, there was a vision for something right at the beginning, and it's quite important to have a vision. But I think being too prescriptive at the outset about what the solution or the particular interaction is going to be, that can kind of stifle it. So I think you need to be open that the solution might be something that you weren't expecting, and that kind of, and also I think the last pitfall that I'll talk about here, because I'm sure you've all got some things to contribute as well, is that if you're in a business and you're looking for an e-learning partner or a learning partner, don't expect to hand a brief over to your partner and get back what you wanted. You will always need to collaborate, and they will, and that sort of collaborative magic is what produces the best things. So don't think that it's something you can throw over the fence and you'll get something that's perfect coming back or that works.
Oh, we all know that it can change from minute one, can't it? I mean, the day you get it, well, it changes all the time as soon as you start diving into a brief, and that's, for me, is the fun part, is going on that journey together and realizing together that what a customer thought they might have wanted perhaps isn't fit for purpose, and that's where we need to come in and advise them confidently that actually, you know, have we thought about doing something else? And that's hopefully the value we're adding. I just wanted to go back to something you did touch on there, Steve, which is the, you know, successes, quick wins. It's all about measurement, isn't it? So, you know, how are we going to define that? Which, and therefore, how do we define those successes and longer term wins? And hopefully, we'll touch on that more about data later on as I think the fourth pillar. Preston, sorry, did you want to come in there with any thoughts on what Steve's been saying?
Just gonna. He touched on a lot of it. One of the pitfalls recently, is because of COVID, because of the influx of all this digital learning, is things that learners used to really appreciate, they're kind of saturated now. So really, we're finding simplicity is the answer. Lower cognitive load, reduce the seat time, simplicity, because they have a lot to do.
Digital fatigue. This is the phrase we're hearing.
Just fatigue.
Talk to learners, see what they need. Yeah, fatigue in general. But
yeah.
If you need, and don't assume that your great idea is going to be something that they want to spend time on.
Yeah, I mean, I'd add to that. You know, I think there needs to be much more attention to the overall work experience that you're asking people to do in their jobs. So, you know, you've seen this digital exhaustion come through because of this, you know, like a very simplistic pivot from being one set of exhaustion of commuting into offices to another set of exhaustion of back-to-back Zoom or Teams meetings. And that's bad design. It's just fundamentally bad design, and it's not focused on real productivity and performance. If you look at the research, it just shows you that you need to give people space. They need time to think, they need time to reflect, and then they need time to contribute. And the busy work doesn't really achieve a great deal, other than gives you an excuse for being there and present, either virtually or real. So if you're going to grasp that nettle properly, and I think many organizations have to start genuinely doing this, because you can't get away with that anymore. You know, the challenges to most organizations are existential now within a 6-month window of time, because you just don't know what's going to happen next. And if your people aren't ready, and you don't give them the right dynamics to perform their job and role, then it's an issue. So it's not just learning; it's about the environment in which that learning is going on.
Right. What I'm liking here is that it's about the learner / worker. It's about the whole being and looking after them. And I've spoken to a number of clients recently, and I know 1 or 2 organisations that are now putting learning under the well-being banner. So where there was an L&D department, there is now a well-being umbrella, and learning sits within this, because it's about good learning. It's about, you know, care and development of the people you've got, the talent you've got, but also doing so, as you say, Lars, in an environment and with the bandwidth and space that people need.
Yeah, but you should go further than that, really, if you think about it. That's just another box. it's a broader box, but it's a box in which you're just putting learning again, where in fact learning is, we're doing it all the time, aren't we? Whether it's designed or just ambient, it's going on, and it's either productive supportive learning, or it can even be counterproductive because it's not being managed. So you got to think of it, and I think this is one of the structural problems that many organizations still have, especially more mature ones, is they're very siloed in their approach. So L&D is L&D, and then you've got internal comms elsewhere, and then you've got sort of management initiatives or leadership initiatives, and they sort of cut through. And I mean, I've sat with a good, well, it was about 150. I didn't speak to all of them, but I spoke to a good number of them, chief people officers and CLOs over in the US just recently, and that really resonated in terms of the challenges that they were expressing, and that was that people, as we've just said, are struggling with the demands that they're being placed on them. So the L&D team is, because they're told to, there's a whole compliance layer, regulatory layer, and there's a whole bunch of notifications sitting in your inbox to complete things. At the same time, you're being asked to do things by your manager. At the same time, you're being asked to do different things by the internal comms or satisfaction crew, and then there's performance management going on at the same time. So if it's not coordinated, you end up with noise. And in discussing that with the senior folk, they know it because they receive it as well. The sea of notifications, and you don't know where to start, and you don't know how to respond. So what's the end result? You're training people to ignore it. That's the behavioral outcome. Often is, unfortunately, it gets ignored, and so the good work of design or the individual good work of all of these activities falls on deaf ears and eyeballs, effectively. So that's a real challenge that we need to get over, and that's about coordination.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. Thank you. And it kind of moves a little bit into the next pillar. But we talked about the learning objectives, the business objectives. Absolutely right. But doing so under the environment of care and space and making sure people don't learn the culture of avoidance. I think that's right, because as you say, Lars, everybody's got a lot on their plate. I'm going to bring it back to the wheel, if I may. The second pillar, skills development at the heart of learning. So I suppose this blends into what we've been talking about and looking at outcomes and objectives, and the key to unlocking quality learning. There is a skills gap, isn't there? We're hearing this a lot, and I'm going to ask you, Preston, about this one. Why is skills development fundamental to every organization? And what do we mean by skills? Why does there always seem to be a skills gap that we're hearing about so much?
It's a great question. So skills are dynamic, they're fluid, right? They belong to the people who are moving in, moving up, lately moving out, right? So those skills are dynamic, so you have to address that on an ongoing basis. Every organization also has a contract, usually unwritten, sometimes written, with employees, right? The business will help you grow and improve your skills, and you're supposed to use those skills to help the business succeed, right? That's the unwritten contract that you have. So there's a few reasons why it doesn't always happen. One of the big reasons is lack of personalization, and we're getting better at this. So every learner comes to the table with a different set of skills and different levels of competencies with those skills. And now with COVID, even like Lars said, even different virtual environments. Now you used to be able to learn in the same environment, learn in the same classroom, all focus on the same thing. But now you're learning at home with kids running around and everything. So you're in a different learning environment. So in many organizations traditionally have tried to grow skills with a one-size-fits-all approach. And that's not going to give most learners what they need. Because again, they're coming to the table from all different places and all different levels. So this is why the ability to get to know the learners using data and personalize the experiences is so important. And that's what we need to help bridge that fluid skills gap.
Okay, and what sort of trends are we seeing then when we're looking at skills between hard skills, soft skills in business? What are employers looking for today, and how is that a challenge? How is that a challenge for them?
So hard skills have traditionally been much easier to simulate, to practice. In most organizations, learners can do it on their own because you don't need someone around. You can improve quickly. So simulation, simple simulations, AR, VR is coming up, helping with a lot of hard skills. Soft skills generally require more emotional engagement. Really good complex simulations can work, or narratives, really good narratives or stories, to provide the equivalent level of practice and improvement. Also difficult to improve soft skills without other people, right? So soft skills are really about interacting with others.
Social, yeah.
But we're home now. And so it's really hard to do digital learning on soft skills. So this is where technology can step up and help people connect and be able to practice and assess. Because you and I can practice and role play, but are you able to assess me on it? And am I going to listen to you? So we need technology to help us, scale
Right.
that.
Right, Lars, I was going to bring you in here. Technology, I mean, from your perspective as well, and the loss of social learning from the actually in-person learning that we may have seen. How are we counteracting that at the moment? What can we do with using technology?
I think there's a couple of things to raise here. I think there's, as learning professionals, and you guys are experts in this, and I've spent a long time, designing learning experiences. We all know that the best, most effective solution is one that's a blend of different learning activities. It's not one thing. It's some of it's synchronous, some of it's asynchronous, some of it should be in person, some of it should be away and reflective, and it depends on the nature of the topic and the mix of skills and behaviors that you're looking to shift and move. But it's always going to be a mix of those things if you're looking at the end, seriously looking at the end behaviors being shifted and changed, and it becoming subsumed into experience and expertise that they've adopted. So it's always been the case. So pre-pandemic, say, the emphasis would have been, let's go in the classroom, and then the bias was be to too much in person, arguably, and that supports certain types of people. I like that, and other people shrink away from that and don't get as much from it. And then in pandemic, as I said before, it went the other way, and it's all 100% remote without giving people the sort of grammar and the skills to interact effectively through tools like the ones we're using now, or asynchronous tools as well, communicating. So the core skill that we're all desperate for universally is good communication skills, ability to collaborate, ability to empathize and understand different people's perspectives, because that's the heart of modern work, is that that's only going to be more prevalent, and if you're going to be effective at it, then you need to do much more of it. But to Preston's point about the hard skills and the soft skills, if you look up the World Economic Forum's report back in 2020, which is about the future of skills and work, they list 10 sort of key skills that you will be becoming more prevalent over the next 10 years. Now that was 2020, so we've got 8 years left to 2030, where they were predicting 1 billion people needed reskilling. So it's not a skills gap, it's a skills chasm. It's you can't leap across this in one go, and you can't rely on hiring, because there's just not enough people with the existing fresh new skills that you need. You need to develop them. So there's a real strong imperative to get better at training your existing people and reskilling them, preparing them for these new skills. And those new skills are a mix of the collaborative communication type skills. They're coming to the fore, because but equally on the hard skills side, there's more sophistication in your use of technology going forward, because you're working alongside more smart technology. And the half-life of your job title, or your job description, has shrunk, from, I don't know, 2 years to 6 months almost. You hire someone and their role shifts and changes really quickly. I use one example in other talks when I talk to people about new jobs like influencers. So they popped up and have become a mainstream thing 7 years ago, maybe a bit longer than that. But it's now mainstream. It's a job you can do, right? Some people actually make good money out of it. But it's already a job that's in a threat of change, because you've already got fully virtual, AI-driven influencers in South Korea. They already exist. And if you're a brand, you don't need influencers with PR disasters anymore. You need a fully controllable digital avatar, right, that is indistinguishable from anything else, and that's already here. So it's only going to go more mainstream. So that's quite a sort of pointed example of how a new thing can actually become a redundant thing
Very
extremely quickly. Yeah, and that's only going to wash through everyone's sector as the AI. There's automation, but there's also working alongside AI, and the skills you need to get the best out of that is what people need, increasingly.
Right. Thank you, Lars. Just quickly, somebody has asked in the chat, will we get the recording? Absolutely, you will. We'll send a follow-up email with the recording and links to other useful information as well. Preston, just back to you. You've done a lot of work with competency models addressing skills gaps, and I know it's a discussion that we could talk for hours on. But why is building a competency model important, do you think? And do employees need to focus more on the modeling when they're thinking of their overall strategy?
Yeah. So the short answer, yeah, any mature organization needs a competency model. And back to the aligning with business strategy, your competency model needs to align with your business strategy. Without it, how do you measure? How do you grow your people? The people that are supposed to help move the business forward. You need a way to assess and grow them. Your best people aren't going to stay. Now, if you're a startup and you're small, that's okay. You can get away without it. Often people are doing many jobs and they're growing as the business grows. But, any mid to large size, your best people aren't going to stay if they aren't being measured fairly and they don't see a clear path for growth. And not to mention the competency model goes a long way to mitigate any embedded biases that we all have, right? So it's supposed to be a fair way to measure people and help them grow.
Okay, thank you. I'm aware of time. I'd like to move on to the third pillar, if I may, if we can flash that wheel up again. Thank you, Michelle, for doing so in the background. Brilliant. So modern learning experience is something I'm deeply interested in, and I'll probably come to you, Lars, first of all. We hear a lot about this. You've mentioned experience a lot. As organizations are building on their foundations, it opens up the road to integrating and developing learning. For years, we've heard of learning design and making good learning happen and making it more engaging. But it still really only gives you a one-sided picture of learning, and to continue building that momentum, businesses need to get their people engaged. So this is where you unlock two-way learning, and you move over from a push effect to where learners are beginning to be pulled in. Is that sort of a fair summation of it? When we talk about modern learning experiences, what do we mean? Start from the beginning. What do we mean, and why is this a big priority in everybody's list?
Yeah, I'd sort of loop back to what we touched on earlier, which is you don't see learning in isolation. So the full experience is important to consider because it's a mix of things. It's a mix of the content, the designed experience, if you like, and then there's the people's interactions that follow within it and also after it that demonstrate that learning has landed, or if there's remedial action required. So it's, the feedback mechanism needs to be there. The space to try it, deliberate practice is really critical to it. So you design that into the experience, in a more, with the safety wheels on, and then you take them off in the real environment, and you still get follow-on feedback, right? Because that's what demonstrates real skill, and it demonstrates that the competency has been achieved in reality, and that if it's pulled right back to the goals that you're trying to achieve, then, well, the evidence is there, you've achieved the goals. So, but you need tools. You need a more aligned approach to sort of measure that and track that. And so, that's very much something that, yourselves and ourselves as partners are very focused on, is providing that environment, that the technology there to bring those elements together so that you can access the learning easily and effectively, get that good experience, but you can also easily access and provide and record feedback and measurement of competency and skill, and you can also provide spaces for collaboration to occur. So I think the modern learning experience, if you like, is one that harks almost back to the concept of action learning which is well known in education circles. It's actually good practice because it does embody these three things of learning and feedback and deliberate practice, collaborative practice, right? So providing a platform and the flow of content and activities and workflow, it sounds complicated, doesn't it? And it is to design it. You need experts like yourselves to sort of help facilitate that. But you can't, just because it's partly complex, and it doesn't have to be overly complex, it doesn't mean you don't do it. Because if you don't do it, frankly, you just don't get the results. Things fall by the wayside. You spend money and it doesn't really have any really lasting effect. So it's worth it because it's solid design thinking, and it has the outcomes baked in as a result.
And if you're not putting in that time and effort and spending the money in the right places, then it's a waste of time and effort and money because, as you say, it's not effective. Okay, Preston, back to you, just from I suppose a design perspective, if I can call it that. How are learning experiences changing and evolving?
So to build on what Lars was saying, it's not just learning experiences, but all our experiences are changing, especially the digital ones. They're evolving rapidly, especially with COVID. So, and learning needs to keep up with how we live our lives every day. How many times are we in our phones? How many apps do we have that, get to know us? So much of our lives today are integrated, personalized, convenient, inclusive, accessible. We should expect our learning experience to be the same way, right? We don't want to go backwards. We want to go forwards. So, Apple, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, and lots of other apps on our phone, they're all using our data, using technology to provide these type of great experiences. We as L&D, we need to do the same, maybe without the negative stuff.
Well, to your point, Preston, about all of those businesses that you've listed, all digital, very digitally focused applications and experiences, they're leveraging behavioral science to the nth degree, right? And sometimes negatively, but used positively, that type of behavioral design gives you really accelerated and positive results when it comes to focused learning experience design as well. So it really is worth building that in.
This little thing in our hands, I'm not holding it now, I don't know where it is, but it changes behavior. It's really good at changing behavior. We should leverage it.
Yeah. I want to combine a couple of questions now, just in the interest of time. Stephen, I'm going to come to you again about the pitfalls. Sorry, that's all right. But I think there are lots to avoid, and you were so eloquently stating them earlier on. When it comes to all the whiz bangs and the bells and whistles and the shiny next piece of learning content, there are still pitfalls for people to fall in because they're concentrating potentially on the wrong things. What other sort of pitfalls can people end up in, and are there tips for avoiding them and for improving the overall engagement of learning? That's two kind of opposing questions, but hopefully you can try and knit them
wrap
together
them up
here
into one coherent
if you could,
statement.
Piece of cake.
Sure. Well, I think thanks for coming to me for the pitfalls again. I'm obviously somebody who's known for falling into pitfalls,
or avoiding them, Steve,
or maybe avoiding them. Yeah, maybe. I think we've talked a lot about, well, the guys on here have already talked about the mechanisms and the measurement and all the kind of the things that we now need to do to prove why we're here and and show our worth. I think the pitfalls, the key things, you talked about bells and whistles and all of that stuff. I think probably the message is already out there, but if not, don't go for something that looks flashy. And in our industry, every year there's a new thing that comes along that we're all expected to find transforms our lives in the world of learning, and then it drops down the list the next year, and then something else replaces it. I think don't forget about authenticity. Don't forget about storytelling. We talk about the fact that our experiences have changed, the world has changed, the pandemic has changed everything, but there are some things that are universal. So any kind of learning experience, if it can, even if it's very simple and it just has some pictures and some text, if it has a story which is authentic and that is immersive and it speaks to people and it's real and it's something that they can recognize, then it will affect change, and that, you know, so even though the mechanisms for delivering that story are different, and even though the ingredients of that story and the components and characters and all of that stuff will be different, it's still the same thing that humans have been responding to for 100,000 years or however long. So those are powerful, and those are the things that will help us learn. I mean, storytelling is the earliest form of learning. That's, you know, that's how people shared experiences of the best way to kill a mammoth or whatever. That's powerful stuff, and you can do that easily. Not everybody does it easily, but it can be done easily, and you don't have to spend a whole lot of money on it. I mean, you know, I suppose a comparison might be to, you know, how many films have you seen where they've spent, you know, billions of pounds on special effects, but it's unwatchable because the script is absolutely awful. You know, it's that kind of thing. Apply that rationale to your learning experiences, and you won't go wrong.
Very true. Just example case in point here. I'm using an app at the moment. I won't name the app, but to get fit, to try and lose a bit of weight, and it's on my mobile device. The learning experience is text, image, swipe, text, image, swipe. Now, back in the day, we would have been going, oh my God, this is going to be the dullest experience on earth. But the storytelling that's knitting it together, the incentives to continue to succeed, the kind of pseudo reward, if you like, in the short term, but with a bigger picture in mind, it's absolutely engaging me and making me go through. So that's that you're absolutely right. And it's working very, very simply in that experience.
Well, there was another part of the question you asked me, but I can't remember what it is.
It was about making it more engaging, I suppose. But I think actually you've done that. It's about storytelling. So the pitfall was about concentrating on the shiny stuff, and making learning more engaging is about storytelling. I know there are plenty of people out there that might want to challenge that. I know somebody that many of us have worked with in the past would be going, storytelling, it's got to be more than that. But it's something that goes back from the dawn of time, as you say. I'm going to move on to the fourth pillar, if I may. So if you can get the wheel up one more time, thank you. Something that's also very, very close to our hearts here: data analytics and performance. And this may fill some people with dread because it's got the word data in it, and it can be quite terrifying and intimidating for some people, I know. But look, we know that it's great when organizations are getting in tune with their employees and they're learning themselves about the people that they employ. It's so important to get to know your people. I think, Preston, you mentioned that at the top of the session. But it's got to be done right, and then we can start seeing sort of the right effect that our organization's learning is having on our people. And we can capture what's happening through social learning, through sharing. I know that at Totara, that's a big part of what you offer as well, Lars. There's a saying, isn't it? Build it, keep it simple, and they will come. And from here, it's really important to see that a lot of organizations are stumbling on this, keeping it simple, digging through multiple systems, trying to integrate various manual processes and things. And it's important just to sort of keep these things together. So, Lars, I'm going to come to you first of all. You mentioned about organizational structure, often not set up for success. So we've got to get that buy-in. The HR function can sometimes be one of the most siloed departments, and possibly quite protective, if I dare say that. So getting real measurement and those objectives becomes quite tricky. So what can organizations do sitting in that position right now to navigate through that maze?
Yeah, well, first and foremost is there needs to be some honest self-recognition. Like the story I just told earlier about, just look at everybody's inbox. There's a data point. What's it feel like in your organization? Does it feel supportive, or does it feel like noise? And you don't have to be too scientific about it, really. I mean, the anecdotal stories, if you get lots of nods like this, from a range of people, you're gonna capture that. So one of the simplest things you can do is to remove some of that noise. And that's sort of a subtractive exercise, which you can then start to build back from. But to the point about silos, that is challenging. Any organization that's got structure in built up workflows and work processes and things like that, they're hard to change unless you do that. It needs proper support, obviously, from the top. Yeah, it needs organization, but you also need catalysts for it. And I think what I find interesting, and we're seeing this more with implementations of the Totara platform, because it's bringing the learning and the performance and the engagement collaboration elements together. It acts as a catalyst to get different parts of an HR function talking and interacting with each other in ways that they wouldn't normally have done or could easily have avoided. Because if you start to design an experience, right, through that, and you're starting to leverage all of these three elements, well, then it demands that interaction, but in a positive way, right? So it can sidestep some of the politics, you know, the resistance you mentioned, Andy, that can come from that. And certainly when you engage with senior leaders, you know, they are desperately looking for better ways in which they can you know, support people more effectively, and they can actually be quite challenged themselves about, well, look, the structure of my business doesn't allow for that change to happen at the pace at which it really needs to happen at. So seeing it as a catalyst, you know, seeing some technology and the architecture of it, reshifting it at that level can actually have a sort of a catalyzing and magnifying effect down the track. And it might be a little secret trick really for L&D teams in particular, who may be fully in charge with their learning management experience, etc. That, you know, expanding into that space could actually give them more sort of leverage actually inside the organization, positive leverage, and effect quite an interesting and better change right across the organization. And it's a bit grand, it sounds, but it's doable, because the catalyzing effects, you know, tend to start small and they go exponential. So it's something you can really harness.
Preston, I can see you nodding there. How do we sort of tie data and analytics into this? How are we using that to make the most of what Lars is saying?
It's a little scary. You mentioned this at the beginning. Data is a little scary for L&D folks. It's not our strength, right? So I would encourage everyone to start simple. We encourage start simple. Don't try to boil the ocean. And you have data. We have data everywhere. If you try to tackle that and bring it all together, that's going to be an exercise in futility. Start simple. Again, go back to the business strategy. Think of something simple and some simple data you can bring and start and build those capabilities. You will need, as you gather more data, you're going to need to build some capabilities in-house. Either you can bring in some analytics folks, or you can upskill. Again, back to upskilling. Build that competency in-house in your L&D team. But start simple, right? Any data is better than no data at all. Even if it's just using it to get to know your learners. What are their preferences? What do they like? What are they going to respond to, engage with? What have they done in the past? So that data we have, we should start using it. And
great.
Start simple.
Start simple, a message for life as well, and especially for me using that fitness app slowly and simple, I should say. Right, we've got about 10-12 minutes left, so I'd like to sort of round up the discussion for now and bring Janika in, if you're there, Janika, to go through some of the questions that have been asked, I hope. And we'll use the last sort of 10 minutes or so to ask the panel. So yeah, go for it. Hello and welcome.
Hi. So I think we've got a couple of questions, but I think we've got time for about 2 left. Lars, this may be one for you, but this question talks a little bit about sort of superficial versus beneficial analytics. What's important to look for when measuring analytics for performance?
Measuring analytics for performance. That's quite a broad question. I'm trying to sort of unpick it, but essentially, yeah, like if the question is asking, you know, how do you measure performance? You know, what are the critical sort of analytics that you need? Well, it comes back. I think that's about the linkage to the business goals and being clear and articulate about that and translating that down to individual teams and measurement. And then looking for the day-to-day metrics that support the delivery of those goals, and that the any learning activity or interactions that occur around that, they're all data points in pursuit of that approach.
Yeah, we think about that when designing learning, right? How do we build performance practice into the learning so that you can measure that and see if they're also doing it on the job? So there's 2 types of performance. Can you perform it when you're learning it? Give you the content, assess you, let you practice it. We can measure that, right? What we can't measure, what's difficult, is this is why you need to work closely with the business. Are they then doing that on the job? Does the performance here match the performance there?
And I think that's where having learning and performance management closely knitted together gives you that connection, right? You know, so your measurements for measuring success in the business are completely correlated with the way individuals are performing, and but also linked to how they're being supported to perform, right? So having that connection just innate is a big step forward.
Yeah, and again, it goes back to kind of Stephen, storytelling or scenarios, putting people, not just asking multiple choice questions, putting them in a scenario and seeing how they react, how they behave. Are they using what you just taught them? Are they using the skills?
Great. We have had a question come up in the panel, actually, Janika, if this is okay. I was going to go down a bit of a rabbit hole with you, Preston, about designing for results, which I think is a whole nother webinar we will do in time. Andrea, I hope I pronounced that right. Could you share a recommendation about trying to help people to connect business to learning goals? What type of questions you recommend to ask? Thank you. Who wants to have a go at this? Linking business to learning goals. What type of questions can you ask the business or the stakeholders? I'm throwing it out there.
I'll start. It starts with, where's the business going? What skills are going to need to get there? So first, you have a 5-year plan. Most organizations have 5-year plans. What skills are we going to need in those 5 years? And what roles are we going to need with those skills? And then you work backwards from there, and L&D can come to the table and say, well, here's the people and skills we have today, right? And this is, again, where data can come in. Here's what we have today. Here's where we want to be in 5 years, and then work with the business to identify the gaps. How much can we upskill? How much can we hire? What new roles are we going to need? That's the conversation you need to have with the business to get ready. And 5 years seems like a long time, but it's not. Upskilling can take, a whole organization can take 18 months, 2 years. So you need to start having those conversations early.
Thanks, Preston. Janika, we had I think you said 2 questions in the batch or a couple?
So the last question is, how can L&D and the business prepare people and stakeholders for remote development?
Wow, we've talked a lot about remote in the ever-changing world, hybrid. Are we talking about, I suppose that's what the question means. Remote is now going to be key for everything we do. Stephen, I haven't asked you a question since we covered the pitfalls, so maybe you'd like to have a go at this one, or Lars?
I didn't quite hear the full question. Is it what are we doing to help people develop remotely?
How can teams, L&D teams and businesses prepare people for remote development?
Okay. Well, I think, I mean, this might be a slightly glib thing to say, but I would imagine that over the last couple of years, people have had to get used to something that change quite quickly. And I think from talking to customers of ours, things were done quickly and dirtily, first of all, and people kind of tried to get as much done as they could quickly as possible, and then realized that it wasn't always the best solution. So if you're new to this though, and you're having to kind of revise what you've already done throughout the pandemic, then I would say that getting feedback on what you've done so far is a really important thing. If you've had to rush kind of training and learning content out to people to be delivered remotely, then find out what those learners how they found that experience, find out what has worked and what hasn't worked. So you've got something there that you can build on, and some pointers for how to improve it. I don't know if Lars or Preston want to sort of add to that.
Well, I'd reinforce what I touched on earlier, which is think about the environment, the wider environment in which you're asking people to operate. So if it's increasingly remotely, then what's the environment in which you're asking them to develop in? What are the tools you're asking them to use? And then how are they using it? What are the expectations? So, like I said earlier, having back-to-back meetings sort of culture is counterproductive. It's not productive. So try and build a culture of actual behavioral practice that is adhered to, that gives people time and space to be productive in their work. And
Lars, sorry, just to come in there. Is it as simple is that as simple as changing the business culture as instead of booking your 60 minutes, book your 45, give people time back?
I mean, that's a good example of some little behavioral nudges almost that could be built into the way people operate, and giving people permission to do that, and also giving guidance to people who might be transgressing that, or because people's personalities can change that, it's thinking that through so that you are more empathetic of how people are being asked to work. So being at a distance is different to being in an office, and neither are perfect to actually get effective work done. There's a middle ground, which is, if you can find it in the right mix, is actually better all round. And it's going to be different for each organization. They need to be able to think carefully about that and be willing to set up some ground rules almost where that's going to maximize the output and ways of working based on that, the starting culture and also the nature of the work that they do.
So perhaps the change the last couple of years that we've all experienced is giving us an opportunity that perhaps we haven't taken before now, about rethinking how people work and learn. And we've kind of taken so much for granted, and now is the time to go, right, hold on a minute, this isn't working. Let's make it fit with all the considerations and the different ways of working and the different ways of learning, and etc. Again, it's putting people at the heart of it all, isn't it? The human. Great. I think that's kind of it, unless there's any other thoughts or comments. Closing questions. Yeah, go on, Preston.
Connect what Stephen and Lars said. I love what Stephen said about talking to people. Focus groups aren't used enough. That's the best form of data you can get. Focus groups, talk to people, see what their needs are, what their preferences are. You can't talk to everyone, but focus groups are representative. And Lars was saying about, don't just think of learning as a silo, right? It's embedded in everything we do. Think of learning like technology, right? Can we work without our technology? No. Can we work without our learning? No. Try to embed that learning in everything that they do.
Yeah.
And so
one final point that we didn't quite touch on, but relates to data, is some of the marketing techniques. If you're trying to reach people at scale, which you can when it's remote, then concepts like experimentation of what works better and fast iteration, A/B testing, things like that. We're quite fixated in the world of learning and finding the best possible thing, and but in our eyes is the best thing, but actually you got to throw it out there, try it and iterate. And if you can do that, then you're going to get far better outcomes ultimately.
Wise words, the best possible thing can also change very, very quickly, as we all know. Fantastic. I'm going to close the discussion there, guys. Thank you very much. Thanks to Nick for coming in. We finished on data analytics and performance, and it is a hot topic. It's on everyone's mind at the moment. However, where you are of dipping your foot in, I think in around mid-August, we'll be sharing some exciting news on that front from Kineo, so we'll watch this space. We've been very busy over the last few months or year, I suppose, and hopefully we're going to make a change on how performance management can be a lot easier for customers. But watch this space, more announcements coming soon. If you want to find out more, you can register for that data and performance webinar. I think it's in July. The link to the webinar will be shared with you in an email follow-up, along with a recording of today's session, which I know was one of the questions earlier on, I think, from Jen in the chat. You can keep up with everything we're doing at Kineo on our social channels, Totara as well, with Lars on their social channels. And all that remains is for me to say thank you to Lars, Preston and Steve around my screen. Thanks for your time today, for Janika for supporting us at the back end, and also Michelle, and for everyone else for joining us. I hope it's been of interest. All the best to you all, and best of luck. Take care.